One of the things I feel like it's so daunting to be an immigration lawyer, at least the way I think of it. I've never done it because you have people coming in from some culture or country or background that you may have nothing to do with. You may have granted, you know a lot of languages, but like, how do you handle such a heavy and unpredictable thing?
That's where every immigration lawyer starts often is, you don't have translators on staff. I always use an interpreter for consultations because I need 100%. I need to get and give 100%. So spending a lot of time with the clients is what I love to do. And that's really what we do at our office every day, because I'm a big believer. If you spend enough time with a client, you ask a lot of questions, and hopefully a couple of those are the right question, you'll be able to find a solution.
Hey there, everyone. I'm Tom Bosworth, and this is the City of Brotherly Law. Welcome to Philly's Legal Pulse, where we chat with some of the city's and the country's best attorneys about what's really going on in our courts and our communities. Let's dive in and see what's brewing in the City of Brotherly Law. How did you get into immigration?
Well, like a lot of lawyers, number one was like, what kind of a job did you do when you were in law school, right? So when I was in law school, I worked for Michelle Pistone's CARES clinic, which was all about refugee and immigrant services. And then my first job was at a suburban law firm, and it struck me right away, two things. One, like there's tons of different languages being spoken here. Loved it. And then second, every single case, you're learning about something new. So immigration, if you enjoy different cultures, if you enjoy different languages, if you enjoy constantly changing law, it's a great place to be.
Yeah, I saw you speak like a zillion languages.
Languages are interesting. I saw you speak French, right?
Not that well, but yeah.
No, languages are something, at first, I was in the Navy when I was a kid, and first trip abroad was to a little island called Bahrain. And I found out that if I spoke even a little bit of Arabic, it was a much better reception. Taxi rides were a little bit cheaper and friendlier.
Yeah, but how did you like know any?
No,
or you just picked it up as a young...
You know what? I was wandering around downtown Manama one night, and I just wanted to, in Bahrain and a lot of the world, if you want some dates, they these huge aluminum tins. And I just wanted a couple. I was just kind of hungry.
Yeah. And
some guys at a tea shop were like, hey, come sit with us.
Yeah.
And they were really cool. I sat down. They taught me some Arabic. I took notes. And, it was a real eye-opener on the importance of language, learning it, experimenting with it. And that really put me on a language journey with studying Arabic at the University of Texas at Austin. Later on, going to Bosnia when I was in law school, learning Bosnian, which I don't use much anymore, but it's amazing language. Not many vowels.
Hard sounds.
Yeah, really. Yeah, they have a word for when you shudder when you think about something, or when you wake up. Dartish.
Oh.
DRTS.
I feel like that makes sense. Even though I don't even know, I can hear it.
There's just not a lot of vowels.
So, were you thinking I want to be a lawyer in your initial escapades?
I actually went to undergraduate Middle Eastern Studies, University of Texas at Austin, and then I went to DC and realized that a bachelor's degree really doesn't count for much. And initially, I thought I'm going to go to business school. So I applied at Villanova at the business school and at the law school. And I was asked, one school you're applying to? And I'm like, don't worry. I'll never forget. I said, if I got two brain cells to rub together, I'll get into Villanova business. And I didn't.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Law school took me.
Nah.
Yeah. So
that was your second choice?
Yeah.
If you had to choose between business.
I was wondering, I thought maybe I would do business, and it turned out that I got into Villanova Law. And it was a much better fit.
Nice.
So, and did that. I started working at the CARES clinic, which is immigration. Got a job clerking with an attorney, local attorney, doing immigration law. And at that point, I was hooked. And I never stopped. There's a saying out there grit is fit. So, I got lucky. It was easy for me to, suck it all in because I enjoyed it.
One of the things I feel like it's so daunting to be an immigration lawyer, at least the way I think of it. I've never done it because you have people coming in from some culture or country or background that you may have nothing to do with. You may have I mean, granted, you know a lot of languages, but like, how do you remain flexible and handle such a heavy and unpredictable thing?
Yeah. So, that's where every immigration lawyer starts often is, you don't have translators on staff. So we have interpreters. I use the word interpreter because, sometimes I'll say something in a language that I understand, but I always use an interpreter for consultations because I need 100%. I need to get and give 100%. And I'm like, actually, that's not what I said because it's really important to get 100%.
Right.
And when you start out as an attorney, an immigration attorney, people will bring their friend to translate. Mm-hmm. And so that's how you get through it at first is they'll bring their friend to translate. And you feel it out and understand. You're looking for all the facts. In immigration law, getting the facts is the most important. And in personal injury also, right? You got a lot of fact gathering.
Exactly.
To figure out what your solution is. So spending a lot of time with the clients is what I love to do. And that's really what we do at our office every day. Because I'm a big believer. If you spend enough time with a client, you ask a lot of questions, and hopefully a couple of those are the right question, you'll be able to find a solution.
I feel like us as lawyers, and I'm not perfect at it, but I try to be, is like being a good listener is a really good skill. And because we like to talk.
Yeah, right.
But even in being a trial lawyer, you can't, I tell the young lawyers at my firm, like, you can't know what question to ask if you're not listening.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It's probably the same for you. And the stakes are high. I mean, I feel like emotionally it's probably, you're dealing with people that it's like the stakes are high. I mean,
stakes are always high. And, one thing to remember is that when persons think about, immigrants, they think someone that maybe is working construction, cleaning houses, but actually the immigrant range is very wide. And, just take a look next time you go to the physician's office and look at the names. Yeah. And you'll realize the impact of immigration. Same with businesses. Look at Silicon Valley, what the names are. Immigration is the secret sauce. So there's a lot of people that are super highly educated. In fact, that's why persons that want to get a green card from China and India, there's a really long wait because there's so many engineers and scientists that are originally from there in line to get a green card. There's some persons from India, in fact, that are highly skilled with master's degrees and bachelor's degrees, a lot of experience in industry. They're not getting a green card through employment, even though they filed many, many years ago. They're getting a green card because one of their children turned 21.
Oh, wow.
So it's a long wait. America has a good brand. People know that if you come here, you're going to be allowed, to compete on an even footing. Yeah. And competition is where you want to go if you're an A player.
Well, I was just talking to my law partner, his wife, her parents are from Egypt. Yeah. Right? And so I'm like, how did they get here? And I don't know anything about immigration. He's like, oh, well, it was a lottery. Yep. And I'm like, wait, what do you mean? Like, literally just like a roll of the dice? And he's like, yes. Like, and I'm like, that's crazy. Like, such a significant thing like that can be dictated just by chance. I'm not saying I have a better method. I'm just saying, can you imagine? Like, it's the difference between the green light and the red light. Like,
it's totally different. And the funny story behind that is Ted Kennedy created that to help the Irish.
Oh, really?
So, of course, for the first few years, it was mostly limited to Irish immigration and then transitioned to around the world.
Wow.
So 60,000 lucky people every year come to the United States, about 60,000, and start a new life here. And, their requirements, you have to graduate from high school or do a job that requires 2 years of experience. But people come, to bring spouses and children and restart again. Make a life here and make a life that's better for everybody.
One of the things I wanted to ask you was, people talk about asylum all the time, and it's like a buzzword that I don't even understand, frankly. I mean, I get the concept of it, I think, is that you're seeking safety from some place that was unsafe, but can you talk to us about about that and what the requirements are, what that entails?
Of course. Yeah, for asylum, a lot of people do talk about it. A person that is in the United States, outside their country of origin, who either was persecuted in the past or has a fear of going back of persecution based on race, religion, nationality, social group, or political opinion, can stay in the United States with asylum, And there are some other forms of asylum that are not so generous, but that is a way to come to the United States, stay, and also bring family. Historically, very, very important. A lot of persons got asylum in the United States that later on became famous, made great lives, especially from Central America, South America. The old Soviet Union, a lot of the gymnastics coaches got asylum to stay in the United States because they were fleeing persecution in the Soviet Union, what was then the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc. It is a challenge, right, to meet one of those requirements. And generally, there's two ways to get in to start that process. If a person is here and is not in what we call removal proceedings, right, court, immigration court, deportation court, then they're going to be able to file an application and await an interview. And the interview, the asylum officer is going to ask a lot of questions and make a determination. In those situations, if they're granted asylum, great. In a year, they can apply for a green card. They can bring family members. If not, they generally go to immigration court. And in immigration court, it's exactly where you'd feel comfortable. It's like a bench trial where you have the judge and the government attorney. Everybody gets to ask questions. Generally, the government's trying to kill the case. Credibility, corroboration, and bars. If the person isn't telling the truth, that's going to be tough
big
to
problem,
rehabilitate, right? Yeah. And you know it, right? You've talked to a lot of people on the stand.
I've been there. I've been on the delivery end of it. I've been on the receiving end of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So super important. And I got to say, it's really challenging. We have to do the same thing as you do, like learn your judges. Every government attorney is different, practices differently, is interested in different things about your client's case, and that's one of the things that we were talking about this morning with a colleague, that immigration, it's more challenging, it's more complex, and the consequences are much higher these days than it was before.
Well, yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. Like, what have you seen change of late? Yeah. In terms of consequence, obviously there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of question marks, I think, for a lot of people who themselves or have loved ones who could be affected. What do you see there?
So a couple things that are going to affect a lot of people. Number one, we expect a slowdown in all of processing, not just because immigration officers are being fired, immigration judges are being fired. There's going to be a big slowdown. Right now, if I were to file, a couple comes in my office, green card through marriage, before January 20th, I'd say 9 to 12 months, we're going to either have an interview and get the green card after that, or we'll just get a request for evidence, like update us, show us you're still together, everything's okay, and then a green card would come in the mail. During this upcoming administration, or the current administration, they're going to slow things down a lot. And look, it's, and that's, I'll tell you, that's the one thing that bothers me. Well, that's one thing that bothers me a lot, because immigration, people come to the United States because there's rules. Sometimes that rule bites people, but everybody likes that there's rules, and everybody has a fair shot at it. And when that changes, it undermines confidence in the system, which is a big deal. Right. So, for example, when we had Trump 1.0, they proposed changing the naturalization examination. So every person that wants to become a U.S. citizen, with certain exceptions, has to answer 10 questions about the civics and history of the United States. And immigrants study those, and they study hard. Right. It's a verbal test, and there's up to 10 questions, and you got to get 6 right in order to move on to the next step and get the citizenship. And so what the previous, Trump 1.0 was trying to change was we're going to make, instead of 10 questions, you got to get 6 right, we're going to do 20 questions, and you got to get 12 right.
Why?
But they added one important part also, which was, even if the immigrant got their 12 right, the officer still had to ask all 20. And the reason is, it takes more time. And if it takes more time, the officer gets through fewer interviews. And if the officer gets through fewer interviews, they become fewer citizens. And that's something I have to say, I don't respect that. That's not playing by the rules.
I'm just going to go right into this because it bugs me.
Yeah, of course.
Is, everybody has, I think a lot of people have an anecdotal story
Sure.
about how immigration has affected. I mean, I can talk about my grandmother whose parents were born in Italy, in northern Italy.
That's right.
And came here, Ellis Island, with nothing.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, this is not unique. With nothing, worked their tails off, love America, and created a life out of nothing for my father and my aunt and my uncle. And then they passed down these values and this beautiful opportunity, right? And that's true for so many of us in America. And it's like the engine or the gasoline that has frankly fueled our entire country. So when you could you point to isolated instances of abuse or fraud or whatever? Sure, but you could also do that in any facet or arena of life. That's just human nature.
Yep.
So this broad stroke, widespread disdain or anti-immigration thing, just it's not only prejudiced, but it also, in my opinion, even if you're speaking from a self-interested economic standpoint, if that's your bent, you're wrong about that too. Yeah. Because there's just so much, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of messaging that's not quite accurate in the media in terms of what we're dealing with. And you're somebody who...
Yeah, no, of course. And, there's another side to that, Tom, which is, we all love Italian food. We all love Italian culture. See Italian flag stickers on bumper stickers with Italian flags. But one of the things we forget is immigration is very cyclical. It's very cyclical, whether it's permissive or restrictive. Feelings towards immigrants, it's a pendulum as well. So, we all have good feelings about Italians, but that wasn't always the case. And in fact, right here in Philadelphia, I don't know if you know, all the Catholic universities are outside the city, right? We got St. Joe's, that's Jesuits. We got Villanova, that's the Augustinians. They didn't used to be there. So, in fact, in Philadelphia, the Know Nothing Party and Native Americans burned down St. Augustine's Church in South Philly.
I didn't know that.
And in fact, I was talking to a father when I was at Villanova, and there's still scorch marks you can see in the basement where they actually burned down a Catholic church. St. John Newman, that was one of his gifts, is that he was able to speak a lot of languages and bring people together, because at that point, the reason that St. Augustine's got burned down is that there was a lot of trouble in schools, and people thought that they'd have to teach the Catholic Bible, the Catholic Catechism in Philadelphia schools, so they rioted. Because that was a big deal with Catholics. They had different religion, different tone of their face. They had too many kids. Their food smelled funny. Right. So there was a lot of antagonism, and that's what pushed the Augustinians out to Villanova.
I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Yeah. So right now in America, we're going through a different phase, and I have to say, it makes me super, super, super uncomfortable, the language that's being used by the leadership of the Department of Homeland Security, that we're going to hunt you down, we're going to round you up. That is not okay language. If that was applied to Americans or persons who are Jewish or African American, everybody would say, I'm not okay with that. But the dehumanization of immigrants, that's a serious thing. For sure. And it's very worrisome.
Yeah, I agree. I grew up in a small town which was very not diverse.
Yeah, most Americans grew up in those types of towns.
And then at 15, we moved to a totally diverse place. And I went to a new high school, and it was just immersed in so many different cultures. And I think I'm so grateful that I had that experience. And I mean, my best friend who I played baseball with is Cuban. His family, I learned Spanish because they don't even speak English in the home. Graham and Abuela lived near them, and I often think if I didn't have those experiences personally, would my worldview be different? I think the answer is probably yes. I don't think I like to think,
totally agree.
But it's to your point, it's this the other, right? This idea of this language that you're talking about, and it's we're really all people.
We
not
really
to
are
not to
people.
be like overly simple.
It really makes a difference. Like that experience you had when you're 15, that's an amazing experience. That's why, I am a believer in like national service, even if it's not military. Like for me, a kid coming from West Texas, from a town that was absolutely segregated for most of its history, it's Odessa. Friday nights.
Great,
Friday Night
great,
Lights.
great movie.
Yeah, a great movie.
That's
great
that
book,
town.
local author. There literally was a high school for African Americans, and their books were the older books that the majority white schools weren't using anymore. So, that's a history that's real. When I joined the Navy, like I was roommates with guys who are African Americans, Mexican Americans, Filipinos. Like it enriched my life just the same way as it enriched your life at 15. It made you realize there's a lot more. There's a lot more to what America means.
Yeah. What's the most challenging part of your job?
Yeah.
Or is it the whole thing?
I'd say, one of the most challenging parts of my job is figuring out a way where everybody wins. Right. So, one of the things I always keep in mind, and, we had a client this morning that had to do a check-in with ICE. And right now, not everybody walks out of their check-ins. Some people go in and they're asked to come in the back, handcuffed often, and prepared to be sent to a detention center like Moshannon Valley. And one of the things that I always try to keep in mind is everybody's got a job to do. And if we do that job right, the system wins and my clients win. So my job is always to find the facts and the law that match up so I can say, look, everybody's going to win on this one. We've got the law, we've got the facts, and push my person to the other side where they need to be to continue their immigration journey. Finding that is, every day I do consultations every day except Friday. And when I sit down, I just keep asking questions. We got to find something. There's something in here if I ask the right questions. And that's a bad time when I don't find something. Yeah. I hate saying no.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I'm sure the same way, right? With your clients, like you're trying to find something that you can match the law and the facts.
I'm always like getting yelled at by my partner because he's like, we don't need more. I'm like, but they need help. And my grandmother died from medical negligence. Thanks, but I was 18. She died from medical negligence. And that was what that
must have really left a mark.
Yeah, she was, we didn't have lawyers in the family. So we tried to call a lawyer about it. And like I told you I grew up in a small town.
Yeah, for sure.
Not even a lot of lawyers who did that type of work at all to begin with.
Right.
Maybe like Odessa.
Right.
I don't know.
For sure.
But, we were just getting like shot down on the other side of the phone. And this is my first experience with lawyers is like cold, callous. Yeah. Like this is my grandmother who helped raise me, who was like an integral part of my life. And they're talking about her like just sort of like wasn't real. That was like the first like, wait a minute, like these guys are supposed to be like the advocates. This is garbage. And so that set me on my path. But I feel like there's no replacement for like that bond you develop with the client.
Yeah.
Of really just sitting there and trying to hear where they're at. It's hard to.
Really, I heard a story the other day. A guy was talking like, what happened? You sold your company, your first company. He's like, yeah, but there was a wrinkle. The company that was buying it did their due diligence, and they're like, the numbers don't add up here. We don't think that you've got that many clients. Something's not right. And he asked them, did you ask them if they do business with me again? And they're like, yeah. And 98% said yes. And did you ask them why? And they said, because if something went wrong, they said, I would be there. So that's the same way with you. It sounds like the way you practice is your clients know that if something happens, Tom's going to be there.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, it is. And I've also had to like try to balance the taking on other people's emotional stuff.
It's hard, right?
Because I feel like there's a component of that you have to do in our line of work to be effective.
Yeah.
But also not letting it dominate your whole life when you have family or kids or But
the laws of jealous sisters, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure we both thought, like in law school, like we're always studying, always reading, always doing something, and when we're working, then it's not going to be as much after hours. Then you realize, oh my gosh, so like this is your law firm, right? So you realize that you're never, it's a calling, like being a clergy, like you live it, and you're never off.
Yeah.
For better or worse.
So you have your own firm.
So I have a law partner, Rick Hogan.
Yeah.
And that's something, he's really good. He's, sometimes I walk into an interview with an officer when I'm representing a client, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're Rick's partner, right?"
You're like, "Yes."
He's really great.
Yeah.
And I remember, for me, I need a little bit of separation so I can focus on my job. Mm-hmm. And so, like, if it was a detained setting, and I'll tell the family, I'll meet you there, and we'll go into court together. But Rick would drive. This is when there was detention center in York, PA. Maybe one again. Rick would drive there with the family, and for me, that was a little bit too much.
Yeah.
Right. If things didn't go the way, it would be very difficult for me. But Rick,
then you got to drive back.
You got to drive back, right? And I'm sorry, we weren't able to get a bond, or they said the judge set a really high bond, because in immigration, it's a cash bond.
Oh,
so
is
if
that
the
right?
judge says $10,000, it's $10,000.
There's no
down 10, give me 10% and we're good. No.
Wow.
You've actually got to get $10,000 in their hands.
Wow.
So, or 15 or 20. So it's
that can be the make or break.
It can be the make or break. And, we have to remember, for immigration, detention is not punitive. It's merely to ensure that they show up for their hearing. But
it kind of is.
When you look at a $10,000 or $15,000 bond, that feels a little bit punitive.
Well, how many of your cases, I'm thinking about my line of work, do any of them resolve before you have to have the judge decide it? Or is it always
coming? If it's in litigation, we're going to see the judge and they'll make a decision.
I see.
The other side of it is, there are some times where, for example, in employment-based cases, so a person is really good at what they do, they've got the degree, they've got the experience, those are almost always resolved with a letter in the mail that it's been approved, everything's good. If not, we may go into district court to litigate those out. We've got a couple of cases in the district court right now. In the family context, like citizenship, green card through marriage, or a parent or a child, those you get a decision in the mail. But in litigation, in my experience, you're going to court. You're going to try every single case.
Yeah.
No settlements.
The government's not coming to the table and saying, we agree, come on.
It can happen, right? So, for example, one of the asylum cases where I represented the client from Venezuela, absolutely persecuted on account of his political opinion in the past, and absolutely had a well-founded fear of persecution. And went to the affirmative process where we had an interview. The officer's like, nope, I don't see it. You got to see the judge. So the day we got in front of the judge looked at the government attorney and said, I don't understand why we're here. This looks like this case can be approved. Government attorney said, I think so too, Your Honor. So we ended up just asking, is everything on the application true? Standard questions, if you're a member of a terrorist organization, make sure there's no ground of inadmissibility. And so, within an hour, we were out. But those are rare.
Nice. That's good.
Yeah, it's good. Super great guy. He's a citizen now. He's got an amazing family. He's gone on to make America a better place.
Yeah. Yeah, district judges. I feel like, because I worked for one. You
clerked, yeah.
And they deal with this, but they deal with not just immigration.
No, I don't know how they do it.
Criminal cases, civil.
Tax, mob, everything.
So what... Because I remember we had an immigration case, and this was when Trump was, it was 2016, so he had just been elected for his first term.
Yeah.
And the case was literally, they had a kid from Guatemala, a child, who was on the runway at JFK Airport.
Yeah.
And they were literally sending this kid back to Guatemala, where he had literally fled, or his mom had fled. I forget whether she was back in Guatemala or here. Bottom line, it was not safe for them to be back where they were. And there was a TRO, hearing, an emergency hearing. where the government lawyer was on the phone, and then it was a pro bono, a lawyer from like one of the big firms in the city who was doing
working
it
pro bono.
bono for
That's
for
right.
the kid. But I'm like, I was just out of law school, and that was the most tangible, like, holy crap moment for me of like,
That's right.
This is intense. Like, the plane was
On the runway. Here
not
we go.
taking off, only to wait to the end of the hearing.
Yeah.
So it was like, and the immigration statutes and the laws are so complicated.
Super.
I'm like, we're learning it on the fly, and I'm like thinking, how much of that do you have to deal with, where half the battle is educating not that the judges aren't smart, they're smart, but when it's such a dense and complicated subject matter that they might not be in every day.
Right.
How much of that is for you is like, you probably have to take it as it comes.
Yeah, we do. There's, with a lot of these issues, like, right, the judges depend on smart clerks to point the way, but judges ask a lot of questions. So we actually, I've got a hearing coming up with Judge Murphy in a couple weeks, and this really smart judge going to ask a lot of questions. Generally, in that situation, immigration lawyers, I've argued in front of the courts of appeal, the Second Circuit, Third Circuit, 11th Circuit, and a good immigration lawyer generally has a leg up because we live it every day, and that helps us out. Sometimes you'll draw Office of Immigration Litigation Attorney that actually knows immigration law. Maybe they did it before they became what we call an OIL, Office of Immigration Litigation Attorney. But it is intense, those arguments in front of the judge, and there's always a lot at stake.
Yeah.
So we're that's where people say that's where immigration lawyers really become valuable, is when you understand how everything works in together. Because an ICE detention officer, they don't understand everything. They're really good at detention and removal, but they understand how everything's. I've had one ICE officer say, "Oh, his wife can get a work card." Totally can't.
Right? It's just like not true. Yeah.
Customs and Border Patrol, really good, like spotting traffickers and drugs and suitcases. But sometimes they'll tell a person, "Oh, you've been gone too long. How about this? Surrender your green card to us." And it's almost always grandparents. Surrender your green card, and look, if you change your mind, you can just pick it up at your embassy. Totally not true. But they just don't have it. Someone told them that,
and they're like, okay,
and they're like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense, right?" And it makes sense, but it's not the law. It's not how things work. So like immigration law, it's more complex. It's more challenging, and the consequences under this administration have shot up tenfold. Before, last administration, historically, if you apply for a benefit, let's say a green card through a spouse, but things don't work out, right? Let's say the marriage breaks down before the interview. During the previous administration and the majority of administrations before Trump 1.0, like that was it. They drop it. Immigration would drop it. You wouldn't hear anything else. But now, if they deny during the first Trump administration, I think we'll see it again. If they don't approve your green card, you're going into removal proceedings, and you're going to have to fight to stay. So it really changes. It's not. The consequences are higher. You could end up in a situation that's really serious and harder to get into. So, it's just like in your job and my job. It's just like every mechanic's job, right? Talk to the mechanic first. Yeah. If you bring them a car in parts, it's going to be a different story, a lot more difficult to put it back together.
What do you say to people if they were this idea of, oh, well, immigrants cost us money. They cost the country money, this economic argument. Yeah. Is that something you encounter? And not in the...
So, look, at the end of the day, I want to be super clear that legal immigration helps the United States. Immigration that is not through the regular pathways, there are effects on that. My view is, let's give people a way to get right with the law, right? Someone breaks the law, they pay a fine, they get right with the law. The United States has had that at different points in times, almost always under Republican presidents, where it was old Section 245I or amnesty, where like, look, pay your taxes up to date, pay a fine, and we're going to give you a chance to move on with your life. And that's a super important part of American immigration law that we need. that we really need again. I don't foresee it happening here under this administration. My law partner, Rick, I remember we started in 2006, and I visited him in Wilmington. He runs Wilmington. And I'm like, Rick, what do you do with all these clients that come in and you can't do anything for them? He's like, John, I have a file, and I'm keeping their names because in a couple years, there's going to be another amnesty. So we've been waiting. I can't even imagine how big Rick's file is now.
Probably huge.
Probably huge. We haven't seen it come close a lot of times. So, in my mind, immigrants are the special sauce for the United States. Skilled, unskilled, highly skilled, you name it. They're a special sauce that helps the United States with competition and with innovation. And also, I'm a big fan of a business having their workers in the United States as immigrants, because if they're offshored, they're not paying our taxes,
right,
not paying school taxes, property taxes, buying stuff at CVS and Target here in Philadelphia, buying their cars here. I want everybody to be integrated and contributing to this economy, and immigration is a big way to do that.
Thank you so much, John.
Yeah, most welcome, Tom.
This is a great conversation, and I hope we can talk again. And that's a wrap for this episode of City of Brotherly Law. I'm Tom Bosworth, reminding you that in Philly, we don't just practice law, we live it, we breathe it, we fight for it every day. This city was built on grit and determination. That's exactly how we approach justice. That's how we approach cases. Join us next time for more straight talk and legal insights from the heart of Philadelphia. Until then, stay tough and keep it real, Philly.